Harlan County, Kentucky, October 1987. The coal dust never quite left the air in Harlan County. It settled on windowsills, clung to work boots left on porches, and coated the leaves of the few trees that still grew along the ridges. By October 1987, the mines were running at half capacity, and the town of Cumberland had learned to live with the quiet hum of uncertainty. Men who'd once worked 6 days a week now gathered at the Crossroads diner, nursing coffee that had gone cold, talking about layoffs and bills they couldn't pay. Thomas "Tommy" Holbrook was 41 years old that autumn. He had a face weathered beyond his years, hands scarred from decades underground, and a quiet demeanor that made him easy to overlook. He'd worked maintenance at the Black Mountain Mining Company for 19 years, fixing conveyor belts, welding support beams, clearing debris from tunnels that seemed to close in a little more each season. He wasn't management. He wasn't union leadership. He was just another body keeping the operation alive. Tommy lived alone in a small rental house on Maple Street, a 2-bedroom structure with peeling yellow paint and a sagging front porch. His ex-wife, Linda, had moved to Lexington 3 years earlier with their teenage daughter, Sarah. The divorce had been quiet, like everything else about Tommy. No screaming matches, no legal battles, just a slow unraveling that ended with signed papers and a forwarding address he kept in his wallet but rarely used. He had a routine: wake at 5:30 a.m., coffee, black, drive the 15 miles to the mine in his '79 Ford pickup, the one with the dented tailgate and the radio stuck on the AM country station, work his shift, come home, heat up something from a can, watch the evening news, sleep. On Thursday, October 22, 1987, Tommy clocked in at 6:47 a.m. His supervisor, Dale Pritchard, remembered seeing him in the equipment shed around noon, sorting through a pile of rusted bolts. Another worker, Jimmy Crane, shared a smoke with him during the 2 p.m. break. Tommy mentioned he was thinking about getting a new water heater. His old one was making a rattling sound. At 4:30 p.m., Tommy's shift ended. He clocked out security footage from the mine's front gate. Grainy, black and white, time-stamped in the corner, showed his truck leaving at 4:41 p.m. He never made it home. That evening, Tommy's neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Watts, an elderly woman who lived across the street, noticed his porch light never came on. Tommy always turned it on when he got home, even in daylight. By 9 p.m., his truck wasn't in the driveway. By midnight, the house remained dark. The next morning, when Tommy didn't show up for his shift, Dale Pritchard called his home phone. No answer. He tried again at lunch. Still nothing. It wasn't like Tommy to miss work without calling. In 19 years, he'd never been a no-show. By Friday evening, concern turned to alarm. Dale drove to Tommy's house and knocked. No response. He peered through the front window. The interior looked untouched. A coffee mug on the kitchen counter, a jacket draped over a chair. Everything frozen in time. Dale contacted the Harlan County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Rick Tolliver took the report. Missing person: Thomas Eugene Holbrook, age 41, last seen leaving Black Mountain Mining Company at approximately 4:40 p.m. on October 22, 1987. The search began on Saturday morning. Volunteers from the mining company, neighbors, members of the local Baptist church, they all gathered at the sheriff's station, dividing into groups to canvass the 15-mile stretch of Route 38 between the mine and Tommy's house. They checked ditches, scanned the tree line, knocked on doors of every house along the way. Nothing. Tommy's truck was the key. A '79 Ford F-150, forest green, license plate KY427BXN. An APB went out across Kentucky and neighboring states. If the truck turned up, they'd find Tommy. Days passed, then a week, then 2. The questions started small and grew heavier. Had Tommy run off? Some people whispered about depression, about a man who'd lost his family and couldn't find a reason to stay. Others speculated about money trouble, debts owed to the wrong people. Harlan County had its share of dark corners, places where desperate men made dangerous deals. But those who knew Tommy didn't buy it. He wasn't the type to vanish. He was steady, predictable, almost painfully ordinary. If he'd planned to leave, he would have told someone. He would have packed a bag. Linda, his ex-wife, drove down from Lexington when she heard. She stood in his empty house, running her hand along the kitchen counter, staring at the unmade bed. He wouldn't just leave, she told Deputy Tolliver. Tommy wasn't that kind of man. Sarah, their daughter, was 16. She sat in the living room, clutching a framed photo of her father from a family camping trip years earlier. He was smiling in the picture, a rare expression for him. She kept asking the same question, "Where is he?" No one had an answer. By mid-November, the active search wound down. The sheriff's office kept the case open, but resources were limited. Tips came in sporadically. Possible sightings in Tennessee, a truck matching the description in West Virginia, but none led anywhere. Tommy Holbrook became another name on a list, another face on a bulletin board in the back of the station. The temperature dropped. Winter settled over the mountains. Snow covered the roads, the forests, the forgotten places, and Tommy remained missing. The first Christmas without answers was the hardest. Linda Holbrook tried to keep things normal for Sarah, but the absence sat at every meal, every moment of silence. Sarah had stopped asking where her father was. She'd started asking why him? Why now? Why did no one seem to care anymore? In Cumberland, the mine kept running. Men clocked in, clocked out, collected their paychecks. Tommy's locker remained untouched for weeks, a small act of respect, before it was finally cleared out. His tools were redistributed. His time card was pulled from the rack. Life moved on because it had to, but some people couldn't let go. Dale Pritchard, Tommy's supervisor, kept a folder in his office. Inside were notes, timelines, copies of the incident report. He'd replay that last day over and over, looking for something he might have missed. Had Tommy seemed distracted, upset? No, he'd been the same as always. Eleanor Watts, the neighbor, maintained Tommy's yard for months. She mowed the grass, pulled weeds, kept the place from looking abandoned. She told herself he'd come back and be grateful. Deep down, she wasn't sure she believed it. Deputy Rick Tolliver followed every lead, no matter how thin. A man in Knoxville claimed he'd seen Tommy at a truck stop. Tolliver drove 4 hours to check. It wasn't him. A woman in Pikeville called saying her brother had picked up a hitchhiker matching Tommy's description. Tolliver interviewed the brother. Different person entirely. The truck was the ghost that haunted the investigation. A vehicle that size couldn't just disappear. It had to be somewhere, parked in a barn, stripped for parts, submerged in a lake. The Kentucky State Police ran the plates through every database available. Nothing. Months turned into a year, then 2. By 1989, Tommy's house had been sold. The new owners, a young couple from Lexington, never knew about the man who'd vanished from the driveway. They painted the porch, replaced the windows, and planted flowers in the front yard. Linda remarried in 1990. She didn't forget Tommy, but she had to move forward. Sarah graduated high school in 1991 and left for college in Ohio. She changed her major 3 times, struggled to commit to anything. Friends said she seemed restless, like she was always searching for something she couldn't name. In Cumberland, Tommy's name came up less and less. Older residents remembered him, the quiet maintenance worker who'd disappeared one October evening, but younger people had never heard of him. The case file gathered dust in a storage room at the sheriff's office, wedged between a stolen property report from 1986 and an arson investigation from 1988. The mines continued to decline. Black Mountain Mining Company downsized, then closed entirely in 1993. The equipment shed where Tommy had sorted bolts was demolished. The gate where security footage captured his truck leaving was torn down and replaced with a chain-link fence. Route 38, the road Tommy would have taken home, remained largely unchanged. It was a narrow 2-lane highway that wound through the mountains, flanked by dense forest on both sides. Locals drove it every day without a second thought. It was just a road, but roads keep secrets. In the mid-1990s, the State Transportation Department began planning a major overhaul of eastern Kentucky's infrastructure. Route 38 was on the list. The pavement was crumbling, the shoulders were eroding, and the curves were too sharp for modern traffic. Federal funding was approved in 1996. Construction would begin in phases, starting in 1998. By then, Tommy Holbrook had been missing for over a decade. The case wasn't cold, it was frozen. No new leads, no witnesses coming forward, no deathbed confessions, just silence. Sarah, now in her late 20s, had moved back to Kentucky. She worked as a paralegal in Lexington and rarely spoke about her father. When people asked, she gave the same short answer. He went missing a long time ago. She didn't mention the nightmares, the recurring dream where she was driving along a dark road, searching for headlights that never appeared. Linda had stopped hoping for closure. She'd learned to live with the not knowing, the permanent question mark that hung over her past. She'd built a new life, but sometimes, late at night, she'd think about that October evening in 1987 and wonder what had really happened. The truth, as it often does, was waiting, buried, forgotten, but not gone. Harlan County, Kentucky, June 2024. The heat that summer was oppressive, the kind that made asphalt shimmer and turned the inside of a car into an oven within minutes. The construction crew working on the Route 38 expansion had been on site since early May, tearing up the old roadbed and preparing for new pavement. It was slow, grinding work, jackhammers, excavators, dump trucks hauling away decades of cracked concrete and compacted dirt. The crew foreman, a man named Carl Hendricks, had worked road construction for 30 years. He'd seen plenty of strange things buried beneath highways, old moonshine stills, forgotten cemeteries, even a World War II-era munitions cache once, but nothing quite like what they found on June 14, 2024. They were excavating a section about 6 miles west of Cumberland, widening the shoulder to meet new safety standards. The excavator's bucket bit into the earth, pulling up layers of soil and rock. On the third pass, the bucket snagged on something solid. The operator, Miguel Santos, shut down the machine and climbed out to investigate. Half buried in the dirt was a twisted piece of metal, rusted, bent, but unmistakably part of a vehicle frame. Carl walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Probably an old wreck," he muttered. Someone ran off the road back in the day, and it got buried over time. They kept digging carefully now. Within an hour, they'd uncovered more: a section of a truck bed, a rear axle, fragments of a tailgate. The metal was corroded, covered in decades of rust and soil, but the shape was clear. Miguel crouched down and brushed dirt away from a section of the frame. There, still faintly visible beneath the rust, was a license plate, KY427BXN. Carl pulled out his phone and took a picture. Something about the plate nagged at him. He called the county sheriff's office and asked them to run it. 20 minutes later, his phone rang. The voice on the other end was Deputy Rachel Oakes, who'd been with the department for 5 years. She sounded shaken. "That plate is attached to a 1979 Ford F-150 registered to Thomas Eugene Holbrook. He was reported missing in October 1987. The case is still open." Carl's stomach dropped. He looked back at the excavation site, at the twisted metal emerging from the earth like a skeleton uncovering itself. "There's more," he said quietly. "We need to keep digging." By late afternoon, the site had been cordoned off. The Harlan County Sheriff's Office arrived, along with a forensic team from the Kentucky State Police. Crime scene tape fluttered in the hot breeze. Onlookers gathered on the opposite shoulder, craning their necks to see what was happening. The excavation continued, now with shovels and brushes instead of heavy machinery. The truck had been buried roughly 8 feet off the road, covered by layers of soil and vegetation. Over the years, the embankment had naturally shifted, concealing the wreckage entirely. As they carefully removed debris, the outline of the truck became clearer. The cab was crushed, compacted by the weight of earth and time. The windshield was gone, the driver's side door was caved in, and then they found the remains, bones, fragile and discolored, partially embedded in the collapsed driver's seat. A skull tilted at an unnatural angle, fragments of clothing, denim, leather, synthetic fibers, still clinging to the skeletal frame. Rachel Oakes stood at the edge of the excavation, her jaw tight. She'd read the case file. She knew the name, Thomas Holbrook, missing for 37 years, and now finally found. The forensic team worked through the evening, carefully extracting the remains and cataloguing every piece of evidence. A wallet was recovered from the remains. Leather, decayed but intact enough to reveal a driver's license. The photo was faded, but the name was legible, Thomas E. Holbrook. Inside the truck, they found other items: a thermos, a pack of cigarettes, a crumpled gas receipt dated October 22, 1987. The odometer, frozen in time, read 84,327 miles. By nightfall, the site was bathed in portable floodlights. The remains were transported to the state medical examiner's office in Frankfurt for analysis. The truck, what was left of it, was loaded onto a flatbed and taken to an evidence facility. News spread quickly. By the next morning, every local news station in Kentucky was covering the story. 1987, missing person case solved, remains found during road construction. The Associated Press picked it up, then national outlets. In Lexington, Sarah Holbrook, now Sarah Holbrook Pruitt, married with 2 children, saw the story on her phone while sitting at her kitchen table. She read the headline 3 times before the words registered. Her father had been found. She sat motionless, staring at the screen as her husband gently placed a hand on her shoulder. After 37 years of not knowing, of imagining 1,000 scenarios, the answer had been buried 6 feet from a road she'd driven past countless times. All this time, he'd been right there. The medical examiner's report took 2 weeks to complete. Dr. Amanda Liu, the forensic pathologist assigned to the case, worked meticulously. The remains were in poor condition, but there was enough to establish identity and cause of death. Dental records confirmed what the driver's license had already indicated. The remains were those of Thomas Eugene Holbrook. The cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma, multiple fractures to the skull and ribs, consistent with a high-speed collision. The angle of the injuries suggested the truck had left the road, struck something, likely a tree or large rock, and rolled down the embankment. There were no signs of foul play, no bullet holes, no defensive wounds, no evidence of another vehicle involved. It was, as far as the forensic evidence showed, a tragic accident. But that raised a question that haunted everyone involved. Why had no one found him? The answer lay in the road itself. Deputy Rachel Oakes, working with state transportation records and archived weather reports, pieced together what had likely happened. On the evening of October 22, 1987, a severe rainstorm had moved through Harlan County. The downpour was brief but intense, turning dirt shoulders into mud and reducing visibility to almost zero. Route 38 in 1987 had no guardrails in that particular section. The shoulder dropped off steeply into a wooded embankment. If a vehicle left the road at speed, especially in poor conditions, it could easily disappear into the trees. What made Tommy's case unique was the timing. Within days of his disappearance, a second storm brought heavy rains and triggered a small landslide along that section of Route 38. Soil and debris from the hillside above cascaded down, covering portions of the embankment, including, unknowingly, the wreckage of Tommy's truck. By the time the search parties canvassed the area, the truck was already buried. They'd driven past it, walked within feet of it, but the natural erosion and vegetation had concealed it completely. Over the years, more soil accumulated. The embankment stabilized. Trees grew over the site. The truck and Tommy's remains became part of the landscape. Rachel sat in the sheriff's office, reviewing the timeline she'd constructed. It wasn't a conspiracy. It wasn't negligence. It was a perfect storm of bad luck and worse timing. Still, she wondered, if the road project hadn't happened, would Tommy ever have been found? For Sarah, the revelation was bittersweet. There was relief in finally knowing, in having an answer after decades of silence. But there was also grief, a reopening of wounds she thought had scarred over. She drove to the site one afternoon, alone. The construction crew had moved on, leaving behind fresh asphalt and painted lines. There was no marker, no indication that her father's truck had been buried just off the shoulder. She stood there for a long time, arms crossed, staring at the spot where the excavation had taken place. She thought about all the times she'd driven this road, about how close she'd been without knowing. The funeral was small. Linda attended, along with a handful of people who'd known Tommy. Dale Pritchard, now retired, Eleanor Watts, now in her 90s and in a wheelchair, a few former co-workers who'd kept in touch over the years. Tommy was laid to rest in Cumberland Cemetery, beneath a simple headstone that read, Thomas Eugene Holbrook, 1946 to 1987, finally home. In the months that followed, Sarah found herself thinking about her father more clearly than she had in years. She'd spent so long imagining worst-case scenarios, abduction, murder, abandonment, that the truth felt almost mundane. He'd been driving home from work. He'd lost control in the rain. He'd died quickly. It was sad. It was senseless. But it was real. One evening, Sarah pulled out the box of things the sheriff's office had returned to her, the wallet, the thermos, a photograph that had been tucked into the sun visor, a picture of her from a school play 3rd grade, smiling gap-toothed in a homemade angel costume. He'd carried it with him, every day, right up until the end. She held the photo, her vision blurring with tears. All those years, she'd wondered if he'd thought about her. Now she knew. He had. The case officially closed in August 2024. The Harlan County Sheriff's Office issued a final statement, summarizing the findings and expressing condolences to the family. Local news ran follow-up stories. Then, as always, the cycle moved on. New stories replaced the old. But in Cumberland, people remembered. They talked about Tommy Holbrook, the man who disappeared for 37 years, only to be found 6 feet from a road they'd driven 1,000 times. They talked about how easy it was to miss something right in front of you, how quickly a person could vanish, how long the truth could stay buried, and they thought about all the other roads, all the other embankments, all the other places where answers might still be waiting. On a warm October afternoon in 2025, Sarah Holbrook Pruitt returned to Cumberland. She brought her children, a boy and a girl, ages 8 and 10, and drove them along Route 38. She slowed as they passed the spot, now just another stretch of smooth pavement. She didn't stop, didn't point it out, but she made a silent promise to her father. Wherever he was now, I found you, finally. And as the road curved ahead, disappearing into the autumn trees, she kept driving. The past was behind her now.